and this is why I think DePIN is going to be so huge, is not only does it solve an important coordination problem to be able to create networks and products that we use all the time, like maps, but because it gives us a unique way to be able to gather data from our physical world that is going to be incredibly important for informing physical world AI. And that's going to be one of the biggest sort of changes in how we use technology over the next 10 years.
All right, here we are with Amira Valliana, head of DePIN at the Solana Foundation. Amira, it's so great to have you. Welcome.
Thanks so much. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So yeah, would love to start with, getting a bit of your background, how you got involved in this space, and more details on what you do at the Solana Foundation.
Sure. So I've been involved in the space loosely since 2017, but came in full time at the Solana Foundation in late 2021, early 2022 after DeFi summer. And my first interest in crypto was actually about the idea of a community-built news platform. So one of my obsessions is local news. And in 2017, we had one of the first major cycles. And I was really drawn to this idea of a community infrastructure, in this case, sort of soft infrastructure news, right? A utility that people share, that people own into and can regularly get rewarded for. And sort of went on this path of thinking about whether or not that could be built with the existing infrastructure. And ended up going down sort of a different path where I built a platform for creator monetization, specifically in podcasting, actually, that had nothing to do with crypto. Yeah, we built premium podcast software. So that had nothing to do with crypto, but I think gave me an appreciation of the, struggles of one, like taking regular recurring payments, especially low dollar payments, the pains of the creator economy. And I never quite lost grasp of the idea of community owned infrastructure. And so, we sold Glow, my last company, in 2021. I was just spending time thinking about what to do and sort of fell in love with crypto again, especially because there was so much happening at the time. And the resurgence of the space was just incredibly dynamic. And I just spent 5 years basically trying to figure out how to make monetization work in a creator economy. And at that time, there were all kinds of new ways to think about monetization of the creator economy in blockchain. So I came out of the Solana Foundation actually as our head of policy. My background before I was a founder was in Washington, D.C. I worked at the White House and the State Department in the Obama administration, and I thought this would be a fun marriage of a lot of passions. So was our head of policy for a while, and then started broadening out to working on other sort of strategic initiatives, and joined the board at the Helium Foundation along the way. And so when I was sort of looking for a new challenge at the foundation, and DePIN was growing a lot, it was a natural fit for me to come in and lead the DePIN work that we do at the foundation. So that's the story.
Amazing. Before we get into DePIN, which I guess we never really broke down the concept itself. It's decentralized physical infrastructure, kind of bridging physical assets and infrastructure on chain. That's what DePIN refers to. And we'll spend most of this podcast talking about that. But can we spend a little bit of time talking about your work on the policy side of the Solana Foundation? Because it's been really interesting to see the blockchain industry become a player in the political arena, especially in the US, having kind of a role that it didn't have before, and being really successful at driving policy and regulation change in the Trump administration. Would love kind of a bit of like an overview of what your work on the policy side with Solana was like.
Yeah, it was an incredible couple of years. We spent a lot of time, and I think this challenge still exists, educating people on what blockchain is, right? But so much of the work that happens in Washington is to help people understand sort of the scope of things happening in crypto, why they should care, and why there are important things happening in the space. And it's more than what sort of meets the eye and meets a lot of headlines. And so a lot of the work that we would do is just bring teams down to DC who are building in the space and talking about why they're building what they're building, why it's important, the impact it could have in their constituents' lives, and why it can only be built on blockchain. And so that was actually a lot of my early interactions in the DePIN ecosystem, was having folks that were sort of the earliest builders on Helium come down to DC, among others, and talk about what they're building and really help people understand, oh, this is not quite what I thought crypto was when we talked about crypto. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot longer to be able to understand, I'd say, the whole grand idea of how blockchain works and the different elements of how it can really restructure the way that we think about economies in the world. But even showing someone, hey, like, here's this community built wireless network that exists because of blockchain. They tried to build on something that wasn't blockchain and it didn't work. And there are people who are, Helium hotspot owners in your district, or who have Helium mobile plans in your district, is a really impactful thing to be able to do. And so a lot of the work that we would do is just a lot of education and sort of over and over and over again, like helping people really try to figure out the value prop of what blockchain is. And I think that's a lot of what the work that remains, honestly. There's a significant amount of headway that's been made, but for the most part, if you ask most policymakers and most Americans, what they think when they think of crypto, the conversation really reverts back to Bitcoin. And so helping broaden people's apertures and see that this is something bigger than what they think makes them more open to engaging in these policy conversations. The other thing I'd say is, obviously the landscape has changed dramatically in the last few years. And part of that, a significant part of that, is obviously sort of the changing administrations and the makeup of our government. But I'd also say a huge part of that is just like the fact that the community has gotten so engaged and spent time over the years really trying to figure out how to get engaged in all parts of the political process. So that is like as simple as, like I said, going down to like the House of Representatives office buildings and presenting on what you do, all the way through, making their voices known through their votes, through their political contributions. And it's a really broad spectrum. And I think one of the things that's very unique about this industry, it is not just an industry, it is really a movement. It draws people who are passionate about it, because if you weren't interested in it, and you weren't passionate about it and think that there was something here, you probably would have spent your time here for the last few years, right? It's like a really rocky, volatile place to be. Mm-hmm. But people who have stuck around the space, they see something bigger here. And from the standpoint of making political change, that is a really critical foundational building block, right? To be able to have people talk really passionately about why it is they do what they do, and be able to, develop that voice over time is huge. But I think the thing that's been most exciting for me is that piece of it, right? I was speaking to someone earlier today about the idea that one of the things that's given me a lot of confidence over the last few years is not just the way that we've been able to influence outcomes in government, but the fact that by getting this group of people engaged, that is a way that we've been able to, I think, like thicken the political fabric in a time when a lot of it is frayed. A lot of people, not just in crypto, but across the board, don't engage in Washington. They're disillusioned with the political process. And the best way to be able to fix that and regain faith in what's happening in our democracy is go down to DC and actually like go hang out in one of these office buildings. Anyone can go. Like, I don't think people realize, like, you can go to like the House of Representatives office building without an appointment, without an ID. You can walk in and you can see the span of people who are advocating for their various causes in our country. And you can make appointments with a bunch of different offices out there, and their jobs are to meet you. You might not always get to the member level, but you will almost always get someone at the staff level to meet you and hear about your issue. And I think it helps people regain confidence in the nature of our system. And that part is really exciting for me. Like, nothing makes me happier than getting people civically engaged, which I know is nerdy to say, but it's huge. And it's a really exciting component of the industry.
And it's really interesting that how Solana has taken just like a very concerted, like focused effort in influencing policy and being down in DC, because, there are different views on like what a blockchain foundation should do, on what its role should be. Right now, kind of on the Ethereum side, there's a lot of discussion on kind of what the Ethereum Foundation's role should be, and should it be involved in politics or not. So it's interesting to see kind of Solana's view is very clear on that. Like, yeah, you should be advocating for policy change. You are going down and are there like in DC, speaking to regulators. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see kind of these different approaches to kind of building in the industry.
Absolutely. In Washington, there's a saying, which is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so, I think so much of the principle to date has been just having a seat at the table. And a lot of it hasn't been very specific. There's actually very little advocacy that has gone into our policy strategy to date at the foundation. It's really about building bridges and doing education, and that education is both ways. Now, you might have seen that there's a newly launched Solana Policy Institute. That's a separate nonprofit, but we're very heavily engaged with the folks who are leading it, and there's some of the most incredible people who've been working in crypto advocacy for a long time. And so I'm excited to see them sort of carry the torch and broaden the impact of people building on Solana in Washington, because it's incredibly important.
I 100% agree with that approach. The blockchain industry needs to be inserted in the real world. Like, I think it's important that as an industry, people in representing the different players, be it developers or users or investors, they have a say in DC, so that like the regulatory environment is more allows for innovation and allows for the industry to keep growing. So I think it's good to have that influence in what's happening policy wise.
The PR Genius is a top crypto PR and growth marketing agency, helping brands globally with expert PR and strategic growth marketing. They've worked with 300 plus projects like Movement Labs and IO.net. Unlike traditional agencies, they charge only on performance. Their services include earned PR opportunities and marketing services to help boost wallet holders and organic X followers. Learn more at www.theprgenius.com.
Moving over to the DePIN part of the conversation. First, let's just start with understanding a bit what the potential is here in decentralized physical infrastructure, because like when you talk about DePIN, it almost feels like a contradiction to be talking about physical infrastructure on chain. Like, how do you make that happen, and why do you think there's potential there?
So first, let's talk about what DePIN is, because I've been thinking over and over again about like what classifies DePIN, and then we could talk about the potential, which I increasingly am convinced that DePIN will be a multi-trillion-dollar industry, if not a quadrillion-dollar industry. Quadrillion might be big, but I think it will be huge. What is DePIN? DePIN is fundamentally a business model innovation, and what it does is it takes some of the principles or underpinnings of the gig economy and brings it to physical infrastructure. What does that mean? Well, DePIN, decentralized physical infrastructure, is bridging people who have some kind of supply, and typically the supply instantiates itself in a physical way, right? So that might be access to snippets of a map, or access to broadband, or access to, like calculations of uptime, or easy ways to be able to distribute content in a more latency-free way, and connect that with demand. And so those are people, in the case of mapping, those are people who need maps. Like a lot of services need maps, right? It's TomTom, it's Tesla, it's like Uber needs a map, right? So there are all these different folks that need maps. In the case of bandwidth, it might be wireless providers or like MVNOs. And the trick of DePIN is that a lot of us have access to really small snippets of a lot of these aspects of supply in the physical world just by fact of like our regular days, right? We have access to bandwidth that's not being used in a space that might need more bandwidth. We have access to maps based on just our daily sort of commutes. But never before has there been a technology that bridges our sort of micro access to physical supply of different types of infrastructure to the demand for it. And what the blockchain enables us to do is bring all those snippets of supply together in the physical world, package them up, and make them offerable to people on the other side on the demand side who need that information, but for whom they're spending lots and lots of money to be able to go get it because here today it's required incredible capex and coordination. So it solves a coordination problem and it solves sort of a billing problem by bringing it on chain. That's really what DePIN is at its heart. So here's an example that I think is useful. So Geonet is a precise mapping technology. So basically what they do is they make it possible so that robots, if they are using a certain airspace or a certain ground space, they're moving in centimeter by centimeter increments as opposed to maybe foot by foot or meter by meter increments. Geonet, for example, is really useful for farmers who are sowing seeds and need to do so in an incredibly precise way, because if you don't get the line straight, you might overplant seeds by 1 centimeter or another, and your yields might not be strong enough. And so Geonet, one of Geonet's main users is farmers who really need precision mapping for the autonomous tractors that go sow seeds for them. The founder of Geonet thought about building this originally as just a centralized company where they take these RTK way stations or hotspots that are, not too big, and you're finding places to distribute them across the world based on, where they think the demand was, and they very quickly figured out it would be really slow and really cost intensive. It would take them billions of dollars, and to go out and like call the people who have access to land that they might want to get to, like the coordination would just be really difficult. So what they built it on chain, and they attached DePIN incentive mechanisms to them so that if you put out a Geonet hotspot that was creating more value to the network where there was a need for these sort of precise maps, you would get rewarded with tokens. And very quickly, they've built not the most precise mapping technology in blockchain. They've built the most high precision geomapping network in the world, 2.5 times their largest competitor. And they're used by all kinds of folks that have never heard of Web3, right? They're used by folks in like farming technology, drone companies, like a really large range of companies that need precise technology. And that's what DePIN enabled them to do. It now enabled them to scale much quicker and much more cheaply than they could have using a more centralized approach.
Okay, that's really interesting. So the idea is that with a decentralized network where you're incentivizing the nodes or the participants in a network, you can lower the cost or create a more efficient system than if you were using a centralized company to bring those same assets online. And
100%. That's right. Yeah. By taking a decentralized approach where you're bringing the community into the fold and saying like, hey, we want you to have a piece of this, have a piece of the ecosystem in sort of a loose way, but we want you to contribute to this ecosystem. And you'll be rewarded for doing so. You can do it much more faster and more efficiently than you could using a different mechanism.
What do you think are the limitations that we're starting to see on the types of assets that can be actually put on chain?
That's a big question. I don't know if I've seen any sort of like high level limitations that I might refer to yet. I will say that if you're starting any kind of company in crypto and in DePIN in particular, the question should be, what is the problem I need to solve? Not how can I take something that's needed and put it on chain. So like for DePIN, the question is, am I looking at a problem that in the real world, which requires like lots of numerous resources, coordinating between putting those resources together and being able to package that up to someone on the demand side, that is a really difficult problem, or it's a really inefficient problem. And I think I can probably find a way to make this more efficient if I was able to coordinate people in a more systematic and like easy to onboard way. I think there's a lot of companies out there that like want to build DePIN in and it's kind of unclear why, or they want to build in crypto and it's unclear why. And I think really thinking through who is the person on the other side that's going to buy this stuff, who needs access to your mapping software or your software that creates sort of records of ambient noise, or your software that creates like better uptime precision, and why can you do it better is really critical. So when we'll stick with Geonet for a second. When Geonet is going out and selling their mapping software, they're not saying like, hey, we did this cool thing with crypto. They're saying, hey, we have super precise, really readily refresh maps. And the crypto is kind of an afterthought, right? They're selling to Web2 or oftentimes like Web nothing companies, like folks that aren't traditionally on the internet, and they're just providing them a really good product. And the question is, what does it take to build a very strong product? Can DePIN help you meet those needs? And now the technology is available to help you do that.
Yeah, so I think the reason I'm asking that, because I'm thinking back to the kind of earliest experiment with tracking physical objects on chain, and it was usually some sort of like supply chain mechanism where, I don't know, like shipping companies wanted to track lettuce or whatever, like produce or things that they were carrying in their containers. And IBM was working on these projects, and they were like, there were some like really big experiments with Maersk and like all these like big shipping companies, and none of them really panned out. And I remember there being like just a lot of challenges around actually tracking physical objects and connecting them to blockchain blocks. So I'm thinking like things like maps or like mobile network or like wireless network, like hotspots or like digital storage, like things that can be like more easily digitalized are probably better suited for DePIN than shipping containers, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't consider supply chain DePIN. I don't really know what it is. It's like a B2B enterprise use case of blockchain, but I get your point, right? Like I think there was, over the course of like the history of crypto, there's been a lot of promise of sort of different industries that will be able to make use of it. And some have come to pass, some haven't, and some I think are like coming to pass and are on their way. And I think supply chain is one of those things that seems like perpetually challenging. There's likely a solution there. And there's some teams that do interesting things with this. Like, for example, Baxis, which is like an RWA. They basically like tokenize whiskey and put it on chain. So it's like rare whiskey is easy to trade and send to people. They do a bit of that. Like, I almost would consider that like RWA tracking. I'm not quite sure. But the way I think about DePIN is it's a coordination problem where people having access to some kind of real world space that can be coordinated and packaged up over time. It adds value. And so for whatever reason, I don't think supply chain necessarily sort of falls in that bucket. I think what you are seeing, though, is like a lot of other industries where access to some kind of physical space or physical resource that can be, I think, mediated with a marketplace more easily is useful. Maybe I'll back up a little bit. I think like the key to DePIN working is there is sort of a two-sided marketplace dynamic. So with supply chain tracking, there's not really a two-sided marketplace there, right? That is a tracking solution that provides transparency, but you're not necessarily packaging that data and making it useful to many buyers on the other side. Maybe you are, but it's more about like a certain company wanting to track sort of what's going through their supply chain. In DePIN, you really have to think of it as a two-sided marketplace. Is there a supply of data that can be surfaced by access to the real world and putting that information on chain and sold on the other side, as opposed to, is there information in the real world that we can put on chain that is interesting because we kind of know the status of something in the real world? That to me seems like a different problem.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So DePIN is about using crypto networks and incentives to coordinate a global network of people who are able to put assets on chain. And then there is a the other side of that market is there's demand to use those assets somehow in, operations or commercially or in whatever ways.
Correct. And the fact of putting those objects on chain or information on chain, the fact of doing so basically supplants what might otherwise require a lot of physical infrastructure and capex to build out. And the fact of packaging them all up and putting them on chain solves a coordination problem that makes them accessible in a supply and demand setting in a way that wouldn't make sense otherwise.
Get 20% APY on ETH with the High Growth Vault by Kelp in one click. Highgain uses blue chip DeFi strategies with restaked ETH across Aave, Pendle, Usual, and Elixir, managed by strategy pros Ultra Yield and Upshift to deliver highest rewards on ETH, all in just one click. Deposit your ETH, receive Highgain ETH, and stay liquid in DeFi. Trade or use Highgain ETH on platforms like Pendle and Balancer while still stacking rewards. Follow along these steps to get started.
You mentioned Helium, you're on the board, and Helium, I think, has become one of the most visible Solana-based projects. Would be great to get a more detailed idea of what they do.
Sure. So Helium is what it's called the People's Network, but the theory behind Helium is that we all, or a lot of us, have sort of spare broadband, and it is a really difficult thing to go out and build basically like carriers or like Wi-Fi, basically like infrastructure that helps us get access to internet. But a lot of us have spare broadband, and we can, help amplify or bring that broadband into a place where it is more easily accessible. And so Helium basically lets you amplify your spare broadband and contribute that to the Helium network in order to be used by either the Helium mobile consumer 5G plan or by other carriers out there. So, for example, Helium has hundreds of thousands of hotspots around the world, a lot of them based in the United States and now Mexico. They help create a really amazing sort of mesh network of spare broadband across the country and deliver increased access in places that are access constrained. And you can now get for $20 a month a Helium mobile phone plan that helps take advantage of sort of that access to broadband across the country. And T-Mobile actually partners with Helium because there are places where it's easier for Helium to be able to deploy hotspots and get access to than it is for T-Mobile. And they'll actually offload data via Helium. So Helium, I would think of it as a community-built wireless network.
And sorry, and you said that it was used both by other telephone, like wireless companies, and the end user, or is it mostly used by is it like more of like a B2B company?
So they do both. So I would think of this in terms of like the demand and supply side. So what is the supply side? The supply side is anyone can buy a Helium hotspot, hook it up to their spare broadband, and help amplify the network and support the network and create access. Okay, so you have all this broadband that can be tapped into. On the other side, who wants that? Well, Helium Mobile is a cell network that you could subscribe to today. You can get on your phone, $20 a month. I have it on my phone, and you can take advantage of that offloading capability. But also, there's other folks out there that will offload using that network capability because it provides access that doesn't exist otherwise. So Movistar in Mexico, for example, they worked with Helium because they felt like Helium could provide access to broadband in places that were really difficult for them to be able to service. And so Helium actually has an offtake agreement that takes advantage of the supply created by the hotspots on Helium and offloads it and Movistar does the data offload so that Movistar Mexico cell customers can take advantage of the excess Helium broadband.
So is it most suited for on the demand side, on the user side? Is it more suited for people who live in remote areas that don't get that much coverage, or like is it equally useful for people who are in more connected areas? Or like if I'm based in New York, would I use Helium to like complement my regular AT&T plan, or would I be fine using just Helium?
You can use just Helium. So you can have like a Helium consumer plan. You can go to get it right now. There's a free plan, which is, I don't quite remember how much storage is on there, but or how much data is offered with that. But there's a free plan, and I believe there's a $15 a month and $30 a month plan. And the idea is that they can provide really affordable plans that provide really excellent reach because of the way they've constructed the mobile network using both Helium hotspots and offloading with T-Mobile.
It's really cool to see just, like a blockchain company competing with just like giants like AT&T and T-Mobile and offering, similar service or better in some cases.
It's awesome. It's one of the things that makes me so excited about DePIN is the idea that, it helps create a community-owned counterpoint to some of the biggest monopolies and duopolies in the world. Like you see Helium going up against Verizon, T-Mobile, and also partnering with them, providing a service to them is really exciting. To see Hivemapper going up against like Mapbox and Google Maps, which is basically like a mapping duopoly. Most mapping is run by Google Maps, is super exciting. Like Helium has been able to, in over 2 years, map, I think, 40% of the world's roads. Right? That's incredibly interesting. And like if you're able to just use so much of Hivemapper infrastructure, you can get across like a lot of the country pretty easily.
That's
they're able to create a really strong. So Hivemapper. So Geonet is for precise robotics. So Geonet is basically a company that you wouldn't necessarily connect to your car to be able to do mapping. You might put a way station out in the middle of your farm and help create like really precision use cases for your tractor or your drone. Hivemapper is a decentralized mapping company. So Hivemapper basically creates a community-built map where you today with your car or me, I can buy a Hivemapper dash cam. I connect it to my car, and every day I'm maybe going to work, maybe I'm like dropping my kid off at school. I'm collecting data on the road around me. And in exchange for collecting that data, I'm getting rewarded. Now, who this is especially useful for is folks like Uber drivers or truck drivers who are just constantly on the road. They're professional drivers, and they're contributing to this broader map. Together, we're bringing all this mapping data together and creating a community-built map that Hivemapper can sell to anyone around the world who needs a map. And a lot of companies need maps out there. And what's great about the Hivemapper ecosystem, well, it's like way more cost effective. Like Google spent somewhere between $4 and $10 billion to create like a mapping infrastructure, right? With those like big cameras on the cars that they're like driving around. And that's only refreshed like maybe once a quarter, maybe once a year. It's not getting access to rural areas. Hivemapper's getting all that data so much cheaper through individuals who are attaching dash cams to their car. And it's refreshed more often, right? It's refreshed in your daily commute, often refreshed maybe like hourly, depending on sort of where you are. And it's user built, right? So it's like a credible counterpoint to what Google Maps is creating with their data in a way that is community constructed.
So interesting. Do you think there can be, people who make a living off of contributing to different DePIN networks?
It's an interesting question. I think the incentive, the industry is young, and the incentives sort of skew with different networks. But one thing that really excites me is there are people actually building businesses as people who are basically node operators. So, for example, I went to our Apex conference in Mexico City a few months ago, and I met someone who is responsible for a significant chunk of like the Hivemapper mapping in Mexico. And what this person does is he's a Hivemapper node operator. So he has bought a bunch of different hotspot dash cams, and he's recruited a bunch of professional drivers, and he creates basically a fleet. So he works with these drivers. He says, here's your dash cam. I'll help you get set up. And let's do a rev share. Like you map all the roads. I'm like managing the back end, and this is his business. It's his full-time job to be a Hivemapper fleet operator. Oh,
that's so interesting. So you see all these different businesses and business models emerging from this new industry.
It's very cool. Yeah, there's like sub businesses and sub ecosystems that are emerging from people who are building on DePIN.
So like an interesting use case that may come from all of these networks that are collecting so much data has to be AI. How do you think DePIN can connect with AI? Because AI is just like an insatiable data machine. So I imagine that there is a really, interesting intersection there.
I'm so glad you asked, because I think AI is one of the reasons that DePIN is going to be one of the biggest industries in the world in the next 5 or 10 years. And the reason is that, where does AI operate? Well, today, like when we interact with AI, it's typically like LLMs on our computers, right? We're like opening up Perplexity, we're asking a question. It's performing basically a search of information for us. But the next frontier of AI is in our physical world, right? Like we are going to start to see self-driving cars, all kinds of sort of like robots that exist in our world, whether that's someone who's like, or a robot that's delivering food to you, or, we'll get to the point, I think in not too far future, where there's literally humanoid robots that can do tasks around the house or in offices, maybe in warehouses. And all of that is going to need to be informed by data. And we actually don't have a great data set today to inform navigating around our physical world. We have that a little bit through cars, but like I said, it's not updated super regularly. What you really need is a distributed network that is informing this like AI or this data hungry monster that is AI. And that's going to be from DePIN. So, I mentioned Hivemapper before. Well, like Hivemapper is updating maps all the time. Like they are, if you're driving down the street and there is like a part of the street that's blocked off, Hivemapper's collecting that data. And there's other companies out there, Natix, Rover. These are companies that are creating really high fidelity data of driving to be able to inform the AIs of self-driving cars. And that is going to be so much more essential than the more stale models we have today. So if you think about like Waymo, I think they deployed they've raised $11 billion since they've spun out from Google, and they exist in 3 cities, right? They've had a really hard time being able to get the data and get the infrastructure up and running that is smooth enough to be able to make sure that they can operate without a hitch in those cities. How can you scale out what they're doing? Well, you can use DePIN networks to make sure that you're constantly getting data of the physical world in the places where an operator like Waymo is operating, to be able to feed the AI and make sure that the self-driving cars, for example, have all the data that they need to be able to move through the world. And this is why I think DePIN is going to be so huge, is not only does it solve an important coordination problem to be able to create networks and products that we use all the time, like maps, but because it gives us a unique way to be able to gather data from our physical world that is going to be incredibly important for informing physical world AI. And that's going to be one of the biggest sort of changes in how we use technology over the next 10 years.
Goat Network is the first sustainable BTC yield chain, powered by decentralized sequencers using multi-coin POS. Goat's mission is to transform BTC and Doge from passive holdings into active, yield-generating assets through a one-of-a-kind economic model that tokenizes sequencer revenues, unlocking the full potential of BTC-Fi and meme-Fi in a way that's never been done before, and creating new yield opportunities for Bitcoin and Dogecoin holders. Supply BTC or Doge, earn BTC in perpetuity. Get started through our user rewards onboarding portal, onepiece.goat.network.
Would it be more efficient for DePIN to feed all this data to decentralized AI? Because now there's like also the question of, will AI be controlled by, these couple or like handful of just centralized big tech companies who are developing this technology? But now, similar to DePIN, there's this emerging like crypto AI space where many different protocols are trying to get AI to also be decentralized. So how do you think getting kind of this decentralized data feed can also help make decentralized AI more of a reality?
I think the answer is absolutely, and I'd maybe separate the question into two parts. One is, can we use this decentralized method of acquiring information about our physical world to inform both decentralized and centralized AI models? And the answer is both, right? Like, I think the way that the evolution of LLMs and sort of like giant AI models will continue to emerge, will sort of happen independently or sort of like orthogonally to how DePIN emerges as a data collection mechanism. But at the same time, I think one of the most exciting things that we're also seeing in DePIN and in crypto is the establishment of these decentralized AI models. I think one of the things that is very exciting about the current moment is, AI's growth is clear and it's going to be giant. But AI, I think 10 years ago and in the current day, one of the biggest fears around it is that it leads to more consolidation, right? We have further tightening of a few big companies sort of acquiring more and more power because they're the home to so many of these giant models. And what DePIN enables people to do is to figure out ways to be able to push on how you might be able to scale out growth of AI. So one is decentralized models themselves, which folks are working on. Another is basically like ways to access distributed GPU clusters. So, one of the biggest issues in AI right now is it requires so much financing to buy just tons and tons of GPUs and machines. And the only companies that have access to all that money is like some of the biggest companies in the world, right? It's a centralizing force. But if you're able to take a bunch of different GPUs that are in different parts of the world that someone who might not have access to the financing of a Meta or Google, but has access to some financing, can help get those GPUs online and have them contribute to a broader network, it's a decentralizing force. It allows the decentralization of hardware. And I see a ton of companies that are trying to win in this space. And their pitch is, we can offer you GPU access for cheaper than you might be able to get through one of these other companies. And also, we just brought in GPU access. And in a world where like GPUs are just so scarce, being able to get more online is a win unto itself. And so I think that is a major part of the DePIN AI narrative that will continue to play out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so interesting how, right, like just like the physical aspect of AI, like the GPU cards that are needed, making access to those resources more decentralized via these DePIN networks will in itself just push for AI models to be more decentralized, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the reasons why the success of these projects is so critical. Is they are an inherently decentralizing force up against this behemoth that is like got a lot of centralizing vectors.
Yeah. Related to that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the current macro environment will impact DePIN, because infrastructure requires so much financing with higher interest rates that will, definitely be impacted. The just resources available for these really high, capital projects. Same with tariffs, making potentially just resources across the board more expensive. Will that have an impact on DePIN at all?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I think we're at the start of DePIN Spring. I think we're just going to see an explosion of DePIN projects. And I think they're going to be adopted across the board on the demand side. And a lot of people sort of figuring out how to contribute to these projects is because infrastructure has gotten very, very difficult to build out. In the United States in particular, we're very terrible at building infrastructure. But apart from just the sort of like regulatory difficulties with building out infrastructure, it's just super expensive. And the financing mechanism for it is kind of unclear right now, right? So interest rates are incredibly high. The funds that might be otherwise investing in infrastructure, they're finding better returns in other environments, or just like a return to safety. It's hard to find reasons that you might want to invest in infrastructure at the current moment. That compounded with the fact that infrastructure financing is just really it's like a really lengthy and risk-laden process, right? And what DePIN allows you to do is to decrease the capex remarkably and to decrease the risk that goes along with it, because you really turn down the regulatory risk and the execution risk, because you're not like constantly looking around and figuring out if you need to eminent domain some piece of land, or if you need to get like a specific piece of land. What you do is you create incentives so that people who have access to the spaces that you need are interested in joining a certain network, and you make it easily accessible so that buying a single node, might cost the hundreds of dollars, as opposed to fewer bigger nodes, or in this case it might be cell towers or way stations or what have you, that cost millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to build out and require a lot more regulatory red tape to get through. And I think tariffs are only going to increase sort of the difficulty there, right? As costs become more prohibitive, there's an incentive towards being able to break up those costs and make them more accessible. Now, go back and forth on that, because we've seen on tariffs in particular a little bit more leniency towards electronics being sold. But I think generally speaking, we're in a pretty uncertain macroeconomic environment right now, and being able to distribute those costs, one, and give people new ways to be able to get rewarded for resources that they have access to, are going to be incredible tailwinds for the growth of the industry.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting macro environment for DePIN. Okay, and then to wrap up, we kind of touched on potential for DePIN. You said it was in the multiple trillions. Right now, how big do you estimate the sector is, or are there good estimates on the market size, and what will it take for it to get to the multiple trillions that you forecast?
So the estimates of market size, understandably, are a little all over the place, but I would say it's in the billions. Let's call it like in the tens of billions of dollars today. What is it going to take to scale that? Well, I think there's a few tailwinds that are already brewing. One is crypto is growing significantly, generally speaking, over the next year. I think the regulatory environment allows for that, but I think what's underestimated is crypto tooling and crypto infrastructure has gotten to a place where it is way easier, if you're building a DePIN project, to focus on building the DePIN as opposed to focus on all the other tooling that it takes to be able to get up and running. So, as an example, the read layer of the blockchain used to be a lot more difficult to be able to access. You need to be able to create all kinds of languages to be able to read what was happening on the blockchain. Now there's tooling that make that a lot easier. There's multiple on Solana, multiple mature RPC companies that provide accessibility to do that. It's just easier to be able to focus on like the thing that you're building today than it was even a year, 18 months ago. So I think that component of it is going to be huge. And third, as I said, I think the growth of AI and the need for these models, especially the growth of models when it comes to informing physical AI, is going to be a massive supercharger for the growth of DePIN, because the major blocker to being able to get these physical AIs out the door, or physical AI enabled robots like out the door and functioning and doing so in a way that is safe and useful for the rest of us, is to make sure they're well informed. And the best way to do that, the only way that I think makes sense when it comes to cost efficiency, is through DePIN and DePIN powered acquisition of data. And that's the sort of like supercharge that we take. And so those are like a couple of the knobs that I would turn. The last thing I'll say is a DePIN founder is really different from what you see in founders across the rest of crypto. DePIN founders tend to be people who have strong hardware backgrounds. They tend to be a little older. They've been through the founder ringer a few times, or they come from a major hardware company before. So, they've come out of, or we'll say like totally from Qualcomm, people who've built mapping software before, telco founders, in Asia, maybe people who have come from folks, giants like BYD. They're people who know the space really well and have found crypto as a way to be able to solve their problem, as opposed to vice versa. And, I think that the biggest instigator for the space is going to be just a flood of really smart founders who come into Web3 and realize the potential here, who have really strong backgrounds in the hardware space and the infrastructure space that they can bring to bear and apply DePIN principles to. So that's when I think we're going to see things really take off, and I think it's happening very quickly.
Awesome. Amira, thank you so much for joining me and giving me such a great overview of what's happening on DePIN. Like I said, we haven't really covered that very much on this podcast, but I'm sure we will be doing that more and more as, there are so many interesting and just like growing companies in this space. And like I said, it's great to see how blockchain companies are going up against just huge traditional web 2 or just web 0 companies and just like delivering something better where like crypto is not the main focus, just delivering like a better product is, as it should be, I guess, across all of crypto sectors. So yeah, and this intersection of DePIN and AI is fascinating as well. So something that we'll keep covering. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to share all of this with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate your having me.